Hey everyone, Dr. Baron Grutter here. I wanted to make this video talking about the use of angled abutments and how to align them for a full arch case. So this is something that's, it comes up every once in a while on the message boards, but this week alone I've seen the same question come up, I think twice in the past day or two. So I figured, I don't think I've ever made a video about this, so I would try to make a brief video discussing more or less my approach to it, not necessarily the best approach, just the way I do it. So this is an old case. This is, I did this a long time ago actually. They've even shared this case online, but honestly the specifics of this case are somewhat irrelevant. But I'll tell you that what I typically do is I actually position my implants first about where I think I can get them. So I'm looking for in the anterior, this is a very thin bone case, so there was not an abundance of bone for me to work with. I had to undersize osteotomies, expand, graft, all the above. But anyway, the point is I didn't have a lot of flexibility with where I could place my implants. So I've got to, I couldn't just place the implants where I wanted them. I did have to break my rule a little bit and put the implants where the bone was. So anyway, I try to put them, fairly uniform, and on the distal, I did sort of the distal angulation to try to see what I could get with them, and then I went ahead and added the abutments. So I'm not going to talk about implant positioning here. This is not really the purpose of this video. It's really all about how do we get how do we make sure that our abutments are going to line up, and do we need to change the angles of our implants to make that happen? So here is how I approach this. So I've got my implants in there, and I'm going to go ahead and lock them all, okay? So the thing is I've already added abutments here to these implants. I'm going to tell you that I try to stick to the 17-degree multi-units if I can. Actually, I would like to do straight multi-units whenever possible. But of course, depending on how far off angle you go, that's not always possible. But oddly enough, if you go to a 30 millimeter, you actually have to remove less bone coronally just by the way it's positioned. But again, that's a pretty off-axis load. So I try to stick to the 17 degrees if possible. So in this case, I picked 17 degrees on all of them. Now you can come in here. Let's just go ahead and I can right-click, or let's try this again. Let me look at this implant. And actually, sorry, I can't lock them. Let's rotate this one until the multi-unit abutment sticks through. Now, that's one thing I kind of glossed over, and I need to bring this up. When I add my abutments, I do not just add the multi-unit abutment. So let's go to Add Abutments, or Replace, I've already added it. I make sure to bring in the abutment that has the housing, the processing cap, okay? Because just the abutment itself really doesn't give me much visual. It'll extend a line through here, but that's not really what I want to see. I want to see what it looks like in the mouth, okay? And then you could even go this far, but that's a whole different set of videos on how to use this. But anyway, so when I bring them in, I'm using this actual housing so it'll help me visualize better. So all of them have been added with the 17-degree multi-unit abutments with the housings. And so the what I will do is, in the software, you do have the ability to right-click on an implant and say Align with Abutment Prosthetic Screw, okay? So that means I can click on this, and then I can click right on this implant, and now these abutments are parallel, okay? Now, this implant might be completely out of whack and out of bone and is not where I want it. So if that's the case, you can now say, right-click on it, and you can say, rotate, I don't use this, so that's why it's throwing me off. Rotate about abutment screw axis. So now when I move the implant, it's going to keep the multi-unit abutment parallel, so it doesn't change. And now I can swing the implant around until it's in bone the way I want it to be. So that is an option. That's how the software is designed to help you with this, to keep those all parallel. Okay, so if you do that, and I do that with every single one, they're all going to have exactly parallel housings, and the implants are going to be as close as they can to ideal. I don't do that. I'm telling you it's there because it is a strong tool for the software to have, but I don't like it because now my implant position here isn't exactly where I want it. And you know, I've got to worry about either using a shorter implant or dealing with this sinus interface here, and it's an awkward position. So that's not really what I want to do, but I'm just saying that is an option, and it's a very helpful tool. Instead, I'll show you sort of the more mundane approach to how I do this. Sorry, I'm just Control-Zing back, undoing until I get this back to not aligned to this. There we go. So now I've got my implant back to where I want it. Let's go ahead and snap to the implant, and we can see that we're well encased within bone everywhere. We're just barely touching the sinus floor there, and I'm perfectly happy with that. So instead, I get my implants where I want them. And now what I do is I take I'm rotating instead. I rotate about the implant just like normal. Okay? And so I just take this and I find a center point. And I'm thinking that right here is sort of the center between all four of these implants. It's right here, maybe just lingual or palatal to the incisive papilla. And I rotate the implants until they're all pointing at that. Okay? So I can now click on this one, and you should see the multi-unit housing pop up. Sorry, there we go. And so get that red hoop pointed in that same direction. Now this one. And it's pointed right there. Okay? So that's the first approach I take. And if we look from here, these posterior ones are pretty darn parallel, and these anterior ones are pretty parallel as well. Now, they are not completely parallel to one another, but we're talking about multi-unit abutments. The angle here is not very high. You can measure it if you want. I don't even bother with that, because I know that from the front, they're going to be quite parallel. And know that just because the way I've turned them in, that's how it'll work out. So everything's pretty darn close, and that's why I'm done here. If you do want to take it a step further, you can actually take these implants and parallel them with the anterior, or point the little red hoop right up towards the anterior ones. That will help them in the anterior posterior angle, but will make them slightly divergent in the posterior. Not much, still probably perfectly acceptable. This is the only time I ever do that is when I do have these severely angled distal implants. It helps me to compensate for a little bit of that. But again, in general, I just bring them right in so that they're all pointed in the same direction, all sort of converging on the same central point, and that gets them all trying to converge again on that same point, keeps them all fairly parallel, certainly within the realm of restorability of a multi-unit abutment case. So that's pretty much it. Now, the next step you have to understand is that we now need to make a surgical guide, and we also can't just say, okay, great, well, we've, oh yeah, I guess one thing I forgot to mention is, if these are way off, well, now I can come in here and I can move my implants around as needed. This is really just showing me, is this going to be acceptable? If the angle is too much, well, that means I have to change the position of my implants. It's very rare that I need to, but now it shows me that I can. But now you need to make this a surgical guide. So I won't walk through that whole process, but you would basically just click, you would make sure that this model was on, click Create Scan Appliance Guide, and it's going to make the guide. What the guide is going to look like is this, okay? So now I'm going to turn off the implants for just a second, just so we can kind of hide things. Now I've had some fixation pins on this case, but that's not really neither here nor there for this video. But here's my guide. It's going to go right through. All the implants are lined up there. Now I'm going to come over to the implant panel, and I'm going to turn back off the pins. And the last thing I want to do is I want to make sure that when I do bring these implants in, that I bring them in and I screw them to the point where they're going to line up so that my multi-unit abutments can line up this way. Because if you have your implant slightly rotated, it's going to be out of whack. So you do need to index your implants at least somewhat closely. So let's go ahead, and this implant right here, I'm going to click on this one. I'm going to turn off the abutment here. Now, let me change one thing, because in this particular case, I used a conus implant. I'm typically using a max. Conus allows a lot of flexibility because it's a 12-sided connection, and it allows you a great deal of flexibility. I don't want to mislead you on that. I'm going to go ahead and change it to a similar max implant, which is 6-sided, because there's a lot more implants out there that have a 6-sided one, let's just put it this way: a 6-sided one requires more attention. A 12-sided doesn't need, is more flexible. So let's talk about a more complicated one. So I'm going to turn off the abutment, and if you look in here, sorry, I'm going to lock it so that doesn't keep coming up. If you look, the flat of the implant is in line with the trajectory of the abutment. Okay, what that means is I need the flat of the abutment to line up with where I want the implant to be, where I want the multi-unit abutment to stick out. So what I'm going to do here, this is a little trick here, is I'm going to come to the guide panel. I'm going to make a label, and I'm just going to write the letter I. Okay, you can see it right here on our screen. And I'm going to line up these two lines. You don't have to be perfect here. I'm just, I'm being a little bit tedious here. Now you cannot put a mark on the top here. It won't allow you to, but it will allow you to put it on the palatal area. Now, with that in mind, sometimes it's easier to make the mark on the linguals or on the buccal so that you can see it better. So let's go ahead and do that. Again, we're lined up. These two lines here are coincident. If I line them up just like this, and now I can zoom out a bit to make this eye pretty big, and now let's click apply text. Oh, sorry. Gotta make sure that this model is activated. Apply text. Okay, and it's gonna make an eye right here. Now, one of the things I do want to show you, let me pause this video for just a second. Okay, so that is finished processing, and now you can see this little mark here on the outside of this model. Okay, so when we go ahead and line up our implant, we know we have something to index off of. What I wanted to show you is that if you're using the BioMax kit, the driver, it's a little bit hard to see in this image, but if you see there's a flat here, there's a little divot in the rim here of this driver. There's another divot here, it lines up with the flat. Each of these divots lines up with the flat. So if when you're inserting the implant, you line this little divot up with this line, you will now ensure that your implants are rotated or timed the same way as you planned them to be. So you just go ahead and add the little label to each one of these implants the same way I just did. I'm not going to do it on all 4 of them, but now you know that your implants can line up correctly, and you know how to time them pretty darn close to your planned position. Yeah. Anyway, so hopefully that helps to show you how to line up, how to position your implants to rotate them to see if they're going to be parallel enough, and then how to mark your guide so that you can time the implants properly. All right, you have a good one.